automation doesn't create order. Automation depends on order to be effective.
Filippo, in your latest piece, you write about the business enterprise as code. And obviously, that's a phrase that's really, really popular in Silicon Valley. But explain that a little bit more.
Absolutely. So enterprises are ways to bring order to the chaos of nature, of reality. Humans, since time immemorial, have been endeavoring to bring order to progress society, improve lives of others, and overall sort of make value out of like these complicated, messy things that reality throws at us. To this day, enterprises have been operating essentially like somewhat complex machines. They have inputs, they do something with it, and they have outputs, be it products or services. A lot of how they've been operating historically has been based on tribal knowledge or some kind of like loosely codified policy and procedure, but it was always something that was like partially codified in some documents, but in many cases relying on tribal knowledge. What we are arguing right now is that given the productivity boost that new technologies such as AI is bringing to the world, the necessity to codify that further and becoming more explicit level and implicit, having that all, what are the inputs, how do we process, and what are the outputs, is increasingly going to be dependent on being an explicit definition rather than just something that is tribal knowledge and left to a people-based organization to understand and know.
So it's not enough for someone just to have a lot of experience, because if something happens to that one person, then if it were codified, if the enterprise as code were in place, then it'd be much easier for the enterprise to move on. Is that the thinking?
That's absolutely part of the thinking, yes. Like the fact that there's knowledge is codified with people, and so as people turn over, you lose some of that knowledge, or that knowledge can get corrupted. That's how also the culture of companies evolves in ways that can sometimes be unpredictable. That is certainly a factor. Now, there's reality though, and there's an appreciation that companies are living beings, entities that need to evolve with the times like human beings do. So having something that is rigidly codified in a way that is somehow unchangeable or unmovable also doesn't work. So you need to have something that, yes, is codified, but has enough adaptability and the ability to evolve with the times in such a way that allows the organization to rise to the challenges of the times.
Very important distinction. If we could talk about cloud modernization, because when I think about that, that used to be the big differentiator. Now, it's the baseline. So if it's the baseline, what can a company do to get that competitive advantage?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, it is the baseline of the new. However, a lot of organizations still have to embrace the journey to cloud. Many, many, many large corporations still rely on their old legacy data centers to operate most of their technology infrastructure. The adoption of cloud right now is certainly on a high, steep curve, but it's mostly geared towards new things that are being built and designed right now. A lot of the legacy core systems are still operating on the old infrastructure. So a lot of organizations are still in the point of asking themselves, should I accelerate the journey to cloud, or should I just progress on a more natural pace, or how should I think about that? So then there's an element of that. But assuming that you've made most of that journey, then the question you asked becomes incredibly relevant, because cloud is fantastic in terms of allowing companies to rent scale and access to a set of capabilities that would be prohibitively expensive for them to individually develop and build. But once they're there, they have the same capabilities that everybody else also has access to. So how you use that capability and what kind of assets you create within that set of capabilities is really the key.
As AI scales, what types of coherence and discipline does a company need to have in place to set themselves up for success?
Absolutely. So if this brings us back to the concept that we were talking about earlier of the enterprise as code, as at the end of the day, automation is really the key word. But automation doesn't create order. Automation depends on order to be effective. So organizations need to create that level of order in their processes within their data to be able to make the most out of AI and automation broadly defined. That increasingly, as these automation capabilities, of which AI is a key component, mature even further, that reliance on having that order in place is going to be a key differentiator. Order in your data, order in your models, order in your processes, have those, and you can create step change productivity gains within your firm and organization.
Order in your data, order in your processes. But what about this business enterprise? You mentioned this earlier, but I understand now it has to be codified not just so new employees understand it, but so that the machines understand how the business works. Why is that so important?
Well, that's essential because at the end of the day, if we're relying on machines, models, and these kind of agents to act in a certain set of capacity, the key element that enables them to do that is context. They need the context to be able to perform the task that you're assigning to them. Without that context, they're not going to be effective at performing the particular task. You also need to be very specific with regards to what is the task that you need to have them perform. If you can define that task very precisely, and if you give them all the context that's necessary to perform that task, that's when they're going to excel. If you define that task too broadly, or if the context is not sufficient, then that's where you're going to see some of those agents go astray and not be effective.
Well, we don't want them to go astray. Thank you so much.
Thank you.